The title of our webinar today is Participatory Co-Design Process of Interactive Technologies for Older Adults, and will be presented by Dr. Johnny Muñoz. John is a game designer and interface technologist specializing in the use of physiological signals to optimize user experience while using interactive systems. John is currently a research fellow and lecturer at the University of Waterloo, carrying out research in the fields of assistive technology, human-robot interaction, and virtual reality. John has co-created multiple games for rehabilitation and exercise promotion among older adults via user-centered design methodologies, including clinical experts, physical therapists, psychologists, and game developers. Thank you very much, John, for being with us today. And with that, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Kenrick, for the invitation. As Kenrick mentioned, we will try to show some of the methodologies that we have been using, which are mostly focused on a design framework called user-centered design. In particular, when Kenrick invited me to this talk, we were discussing around how difficult sometimes it is to engage stakeholders, especially healthcare professionals and practitioners when it comes to design different technologies. So I hope this talk will be helpful and will bring also a different set of tools and technologies that will be useful for you in your career. As Kenrick mentioned, I'm a researcher. I currently work at the Games Institute and many other different laboratories at the University of Waterloo. I'm also a lecturer in human factors, but I also discovered my passion on designing games. What a game designer does is basically try to create the main elements, or try to discuss and design the main elements of a game, such as game mechanics, story, technology, and aesthetics. My career path is somehow a mix between engineering, having a background in physics engineering and bioengineering, and also being involved in human-computer interaction studies, especially the ones including and involving serious games for health. Currently wrapping up the postdoctoral fellow at the University of Waterloo, working in the field of interactive assistive technologies. Some of the areas of research that I have are related to game design, human-robot interaction, and human-computer interaction. And my goal is trying to create more user-centered technologies, especially working with many different emerging information and communication technologies like wearable sensors, virtual reality, and part of my design process is really focused on design thinking and human-centered design. Today's talk is around some of those methodologies and how you can use those tools to basically design your solutions and bring a little bit of more user-informed decisions through your academic path. I'm particularly interested in involving older adults in the design and development of interactive technological solutions, and also how to collaborate with healthcare professionals. And in particular, also, I work a lot in the field of physiological computing, and I'm promoting, developing a series of hands-on workshops to facilitate the integration of physiological signals in wearable sensors. So if you guys are interested, let me know. I will put my email and contact at the end of this talk. So let's briefly start with, what is user-centered design and how we can really employ this in our research. So from a design point of view, you can design technologies without the need of involving end users from early stages. But the difference between user-centered design and other design methodologies is the creation of user models and deep research on user needs, motivations, objectives, and especially when it comes to create technologies that are supposed to be used by a targeted end user or a specific population, the process of creating an empathetic view is one of the core elements of user-centered design. So you basically need to put yourself in the place of the end users and try to create that empathetic view on the different activities they do. So once you manage to create that level of research and that level of empathy, then you start creating technologies that are ideally more connected and somehow more informed by the knowledge that you have developed for your users. So, and then you create an iteration cycle of ideation, prototyping, and testing, always involving users when creating these technologies. So in a nutshell, in user-centered design, what we want to do is really involve end users early in the stages and not only at the end of the design process. But there's many different ways in which you really can involve older adults or end users overall in your design process. And what I've seen is, I will say 70–80% of the times when people tend to create technologies, especially for older adults, they tend to use them as testers. And involving them as testers, it really is quick, light, cheap, and it's also quite straightforward because you only develop whatever you want to develop in the lab, and then you bring the participants to the lab, you run your study, you get your ethics approved, you collect the data, and you publish. That's more or less the cycle in academia. However, what happens with a lot of these developments is the chances of adopting these technologies are quite low, just because they have not necessarily been designed around the user, but most of the times with specific ideas that we have in our research labs or the mindset of the technologies that we have available in our lab. Another more active way of involving end users is bringing them as informants. So throughout the decision-making process, when you are designing a technology, you can knock their doors. You can call them, and you can bring them as a way to, give you some guidance on how you are designing this and what are the feelings when they are saying an early prototype of the technologies you're planning to create, or simply just give you an honest opinion about it. So involving them involving end users as informants certainly requires an availability of the end users, which sometimes can be a little bit time demanding, but still is a nice way of at least bringing their information into the design process. However, when applying more user-centered or human-centered design process, one of the things that has been probably most widely and successfully used to create technologies with high chances of being adopted is when you involve them as potential designers, when you include their ideas into your design process, and when you create technologies around their own preferences and motivators. So this is, for instance, a picture where normally I tend to create games for older adults, and before starting the process, I like to sit down and play whatever board game or any type of card game that they play. So this is a picture of me playing with some people in Schlegel villages. This is way more time demanding and it requires availability of participants, but if you see, this is a more active way of involving end users in your design process. So this is one of the key aspects of how, different ways in which you can involve your end users to basically inform your design process. Another key aspect or key term, specific methodology that I use is called contextual inquiry, in which you basically do like a deep dig into the contextual or the context in which a specific task is being performed. And what you really want to do is to understand, to inquiry in explicit elements that you see when people are doing the task, and how can you redesign or design artifacts from scratch using the information that you have collected through that contextual inquiry process. So it's not always related to the end users, as you can see. So you can have people like end users, which in my case will be the older adults, but you can also have people that are actually providing information to use it. So the managers or the exercise professionals or different healthcare professionals. And also some of the people that are involved in the decision-making of whether we use or not the system, or whether we either purchase or not the product or system that we are designing. So this is one of the first and main steps of creating technology that is contextually more rich, and it's also a way of getting to know people in the field. So this is, again, one of the key terms or key aspects involved when it comes to create technologies that use user-centered design methodologies. And the other type of methodology that I plan to show a couple of examples today is called participatory design. That's another key term. Not all the user-centered design process need to be participatory, but if you can foster this specific methodology with the stakeholders that you have, is actually a very interesting process. Here, for instance, you can see I'm visiting a company in Toronto which is doing virtual reality applications for healthcare, and I'm constantly bringing different researchers and healthcare professionals to actually test the prototypes that they were creating. In this method, what we try to do is basically involve people like end users, stakeholders, partners, designers, and researchers, and sit them around the same table to basically facilitate the creation of new technology for a specific population. What you want to do here is basically create a series of different activities to engage them openly and then to foster a discussion around the technology that you are creating. Why is this important? Because it certainly eases technology adoption and facilitates the creation of useful and usable solutions, because you are not only considering one point of view, the researcher's point of view, or the clinician's point of view, or the designer's point of view, but you are somehow collectively gathering opinions from different populations. Everything somehow started back when I did my master's degree, and I had the opportunity to create a specific room that was allocated in a physical rehabilitation facility, where I managed to bring a lot of the technologies that I was using in a research lab. But in this case, I had the opportunity to interact with a lot of physical therapists, clinical experts, and occupational therapists to conduct physical rehabilitation guided and aided by computational tools, in this case, games and motion capture cameras like the Kinect one. So in that room, I was able to, people were able to come to perform some rehabilitation activities. And in the meantime, the physical therapists were constantly giving us feedback around the games that we were creating. And that, I think that experience that I had in that physical rehabilitation clinic really shaped the way that I was seeing the creation of this technology. In particular, I work a lot in the field of extra games, in which we always try to create or engage participants in gaming activities, but in the meantime, we're facilitating some exercises that are supposed to be beneficial or produce certain level of motion benefits, movement benefits for the participants. You can find many different solutions. Well, most of them are commercially great uh, games, for instance, the Wii or the Kinect, where you can see, like, these games are somehow fun, but they have not been created specifically for older adults, for instance. So you can see here that a lot of the movements that this older adult is doing, they're not necessarily beneficial, but they are fun because those are games created by professionals like Nintendo game developers and designers. A second approach is repurposing the games. That means using already existing games and kind of like creating interfaces to facilitate the interaction, in this case, with body motion, not only with hands motion. This is more like a repurposing effect. In my case, my research is really focused in the creation of custom-made solutions. That's why the need that I have to involve healthcare
Falls are one of the
professionals
main
in
causes of health problems in seniors, most of the times leading to severe physical and neurological injuries. It is estimated that 1 in every 3 older adults falls every year.
Complicated to know
the solution lies on prevention and nothing better than some entertaining games to lower the risk of falling. Exo games can be played by anyone at his own pace.
So some of the examples that I will be showing you here and how I've been able to involve healthcare professionals in the design process and also end users in the design process are related to examples of extra games. So I'm going to show you here a couple of methodologies that I've been using to create those games and solutions, and especially how I've been able to involve more than 50 healthcare professionals in my design process throughout the different games that I was able to create. So one of the examples that I'm going to show you is when I did my Ph.D. back in Portugal. I kind of like the process of doing those, it normally starts with a requirements elicitation, and I need to work along with sports scientists, kinesiologists, and people in physical and occupational rehab to really help me to define what are the correct movements to basically define my training protocol. Then I moved to actually doing the contextual inquiry, in which I go and I spend some time with older adults and I try to really understand what are the fun things or the things that they perceive as fun and the things that they perceive as potential barriers or frustrators to create my technology. And then I do iterative game design process, similar to the ideation, prototype, and testing that I just showed before. So one of the conventional pipeline of creating this type of games and interactive technologies may look like this. So you start by eliciting the requirements, which indeed will, for instance, involve a certain amount of physical therapies or occupational therapies or physical trainers, researchers in different fields. In this case, is game user researchers, and then we tend to create a certain patterns for the software that we want to create, and then we move to prototype some of those software elements. The question that I'm trying to address here in this talk is indeed how can we engage healthcare professionals and also creative minds in the design process when doing this. And I'm just going to show you 6 different ways or 6 different insights that I had throughout my academic career. The first is exposing them to whatever technology you are using. In my case, I've been recently using virtual reality that really facilitates, especially the one using head-mounted displays, that really facilitates the immersion of people in virtually recreated worlds. So these are all occupational, physical, and recreational therapists from Schlegel villages here in Ontario, different locations. And really the first thing I do is bring in the headset and showing them what is possible. So what are the technologies or what are the type of virtual worlds that we can create? we did an entire code design process with a series of participants from legal villages and end users with cognitive impairments to co-design a game that is called Seize the Day. It uses also immersive virtual reality and is made to promote upper limb physical activity in older adults. So I'm going to show you a couple of elements here related to how we involve end users and also therapists in the design process.
You're holding. Why don't you try to dip them in the water and then pull them back?
There, see that?
Very good.
No.
Just like that.
You got it.
Very good. Keep going.
What you're seeing in some of these videos are these two ladies are actually physical therapists from legal villages. They are the ones helping us in what we call play testing sessions. So you get your prototype of the game, early stages. It doesn't have a lot of fancy things, but it really looks at mapping specific movements. In this case, was movements related to the upper limbs in rowing. And we just wanted to see how people react to that and if that was generating any level of motion sickness, for instance. So exercise therapists were always present there, and they were always guiding and helping us to really guide participants to interact using these early prototypes of it. So as you see, they are the ones that are constantly talking to the participants and engaging, or trying to engage them into the evaluation of the early prototypes that we had. We also did many different activities with game developers and game designers, and we always were trying to create brainstorming sessions that involve researchers, game designers, and game developers, business people in the company, and also researchers from many different areas. So that's an interesting way to start is by exposing the stakeholders to the technology that you will be using and getting an honest conversation of some of the limitations that the technology has. For instance, at the beginning, we were working with the wired virtual reality headsets, in which you need a computer, you need cameras, you need a lot of different things in order to use this. So we were basically showing that that was the initial step, but we wanted to move to more portable or all-in-all systems. And then we managed to move to those systems, partially because the physical therapists showed an interest, and they were also revealing some barriers in using a computer and having to set up everything in order to use this technology. Second interesting insight is how can you involve these professionals, not only when you need to test, but also when you need to get or gather ideas around what you want to do. In this case, we were creating a platform for exercise prescription of older adults using floor projections, interactive floor projections. And as you can see here, we were using many different techniques and big boards to actually allow people to write down their ideas using sticky notes. These are physical trainers, both of them, and how they, we were challenging them to bring features of the system that they perceive as useful. So as you can see, this is the ideation process, but also they were heavily involved in the prototyping. So this is a paper prototype of the interface, and we allowed them to basically realign or to redesign the spatial orientation of many of the different user interface elements that we were having. And then we moved more toward digital prototype, in which once we had the digital prototype, we were able to send those along to the physical trainers in order to get qualitative feedback from what do they think, what are the elements that we need to improve of that. So from brainstorming to prototyping, involving them is always very useful. I also did some work with Grand River Hospital. These are people in physical rehabilitation, and the project here was trying to create some activities using a robotic arm for stroke rehab, and they showed some interest in using virtual reality technologies. So we wanted to create virtual environments that were somehow perceived as useful by the physical therapists, but also engaging and fun for the participants. So we started working with around 8, 9 physical therapists, and even though they are always super busy, I think at some point they like and understood the importance of running brainstorming sessions. So we run a brainstorming session where we were bringing the robotic arm, we were bringing the virtual reality headset, and then we were asking them which type of activities would you like to recreate in a virtual environment. So as you can see here, we were using some techniques like in this case, open brainstorming or affinity diagrams to basically process and arrange the different ideas that they were having. And we were clustering them in things like, okay, they would like to see things like activities in the living room, in the bathroom, or in the bedroom, or they would like to see activities outdoors, kitchen, specific games, sports, or even games that are exploring music and arts. So all of these ideas are ideas that we're generating in a 1-hour brainstorming session with 8 physical therapists in the Grand River Hospital. If you want to, I can share also the slides later on. You will be able to access to some of these publications that are somehow useful to see what were the methodologies that we were using. Over here, the main message is try to use and adopt methodologies that are somehow agile, that you can iterate fast, that you don't need to get stuck in a analysis paralysis stage when you don't really know what to do with the data that you have. So things like affinity diagram are very useful to basically cluster the ideas and put them together in a quantitative manner as well. So I also work not only with physical therapists, but I also work a lot with game designers and developers. And one of the most interesting things that I've been able to do is actually run hackathons, or what we call in game development, game jams, to basically facilitate or to speed up the development process of the games that we create. So I was organizing back in 2016 a game jam in which a lot of the designers and developers were coming, for instance, to the senior gymnasium in Portugal, and they were attending, or some of them were participating in a session of exercise with other adults, and you can see what they normally do, or how do they normally engage into those activities before even thinking of creating solutions for that population. So I was bringing them out of the lab, and they were able to see and explore what the older adults were doing. And then just organize people in 3 different groups involving always designers and developers, and we were all constantly running brainstorming activities and different challenges for them to program the main game mechanics based on the movements that we previously identified as important, based on the information that we collected from the physical therapists and the sports scientist professionals. And we were basically running an entire 3 days with hands-on activities in programming these games. That helped us to basically build the final version of our games. As you can see here, there's a floor projection games that are used to promote physical activity among healthy older adults, where you can see here lower exercise for upper, lower limbs. They do a lot of cardiorespiratory training. They also do balance training using these different games. So again, your role as a lead researcher in these type of process is to really create engaging and challenging activities in which you allow people from multiple backgrounds to come and basically help you to build the solution that you want. So these are kind of like the latest version of those games that were initially created just by using these game jam methodologies. Another interesting factor that I always tend to use and refer a lot in my research is the creation of models for your end users. So archetypes that are somehow useful to communicate who your target audience will be for the creation of the technology that you want. And in this case, I created profiles of older adults, and I basically create 3 different profiles based on their willingness to use games in their own communities, in this case, senior gymnasiums. So you can see these different profiles. They normally enclose ideas like their profiles, their frustrations, their hobbies, the goals, the motivators they have to, for instance, using specific technologies, or to adopt and play, in my case, exercise video games. So this is the skeptic profile, but we also have an enthusiastic and a curious profile. All of these profiles are very useful when the rest of your team cannot do the field work that you need to do. For instance, when it comes to working with developers or designers, they cannot go to the gymnasiums or to the senior care facilities to get involved and shadowing the participants. But you need to somehow develop a way to communicate to them who is your target audience. And we all have different perceptions about the target audience that sometimes are misleading, or they can, they are coming with a lot of bias. So this is a very interesting tool to communicate that. So how do you build those user personas? Especially during COVID, I was working a lot in, using remote platforms. In this case, I was using interactive boards. I was hired as a consultant for a company in Korea to develop virtual reality games for cognitive training using electroencephalography. And I was just getting some of their ideas on which are the potential games that they would like to see using this system. So here you will hear, how I was able to engage around 6 older adults in a brainstorming session lasting 1 hour, and how we were kind of like gathering these ideas and putting them on sticky notes using a remote platform.
I like the idea. Can you get it tactile? Can you get tactile stuff going on in virtual reality? How tactile can it be?
So you can do a lot of things in virtual reality. You will be surprised. I also have one that is a game under the water where we need to navigate using maps. So somehow you need some maps, and then you need to locate things using that map. So just added this map thing.
So John, I had a couple of ideas. One of them is you're blind, and you've got to navigate.
As you can see here, always they are. I'm kind of like challenging them to bring or to speak out their ideas, and I'm trying to capture them in small sticky notes. And they are also seeing the screen with the clustering, so they are correcting me, where I can put their ideas and how can I describe what they are thinking on a single sticky note. These are some of the tools that you can use for interactive boards, things like Lucid Charts. I use it a lot, Miro or Miro. Based on 2 or 3 of those sessions that I just show you here, I was able to create my user persona, in this case now of a healthy older adult in Portugal, but this is more a user persona of a healthy older adult in North America. And again, these are only archetypes and representations, and not all the older adults will fit very easily into this description, but that gives you at least an initial idea of their traits, their potential behaviors, and the ways that they have to adopt technology, and what are the type of preferred technologies and devices that they have. The final insight that I have for you is, all these methods, although very much design-oriented methods, are publishable. So if you are wondering, how can you use this as a way to build things in your Ph.D. or in your master, I can easily tell you there's many different venues, not only conferences, but also journals that really appreciate findings and insights on how to create these multidisciplinary design processes involving healthcare professionals. This is this is, for instance, an example of a model that we created based on the game that we designed for older adults with cognitive impairment when we were using virtual reality. And after a lot of the iterative process that we conducted, we came out with a model that facilitates, and we hope is a replicable model in which long-term care homes, virtual reality developers, and researchers can actually interact and collaborate towards creating a virtual reality games and solutions targeting older adults. So you can see elements related to who is the stakeholder, what is the interest, the investment, the key people that we need, and the potential benefits of using those. And this was published in the Journal for Serious Games for Health. Final remarks. This is more or less my toolkit of different tools that I use. So I highly recommend you, especially these days, using interactive boards for brainstorming, similar to the Lucid chart board that I show you, when you can create different sticky notes and grab ideas from people, create your user archetypes or personas and scenarios where you can communicate the end user's needs and preferences to your design team. Affinity diagram is a very interesting tool where you kind of like explore the emerging groups out of a brainstorming sessions. Iterative testing to refine the prototypes. Always try to involve end users to do those. In game design, we call this testing, play testing, because we bring playable prototypes and we try to gain and to research on how people use the games and system. Try to create or to foster events like game jams or hackathons to really speed up the development process when you need. And something that was extremely useful lately was engaging what we call champions or first adopters to help internal recruiting when you, for instance, need not only the stakeholders you're working with, but you want to extend a survey or an interview or an invitation for testing a prototype to more physical therapists inside the same organization. Like if you have the champion that is really kind of like telling them inside their own organization, it's really easier, rather than you sending external emails, because we are external researchers most of the time. Some of the references, some of the methodologies that I mentioned here that you can use: rapid contextual design, designing user interface for older adults, and since I work in virtual reality, this is a nice book for creating human-centered design in VR. With this, I would like to thank you all for being here. I'm open to questions, and you can easily reach me on Microsoft Teams or send me an email if you're interested in some of
it. Great. Thank you very much, John, for a fantastic lecture. We will now open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please click on the hand icon and I will invite you to unmute your microphone, or you can write your questions in the chat. I think I'll get started, John. One of the things that I hear from young researchers is they express a desire to work with healthcare professionals, whether it's in a hospital or in long-term care, but they face a barrier with respect to access. What are some of the strategies that you've used in your career to reach out and maybe get access to some of those healthcare professionals that you would like to work with in the co-design process?
Yeah, I think it's always challenging to get the right people to be part of it. What has been really working for me is sometimes in research, and especially when it comes to research in bioengineering, we tend to focus a lot in the technology, not that much in how the technology can be useful. So what has been working for me is really to have that open discussion around, like, I would like to create this specific system using these elements or tools that I have, robots, sensors, games, but not having the discussion from expert and therapist point of view, but have more like an open discussion of how this technology, or how do you think this technology could be useful. So I think that really serves or helps to remove a lot of the bias that these healthcare professionals might have to engage in research activities with researchers coming from the universities. Once you identify what are like their interests rather than which are my interests, like, what are the common interests that we may have, it's fairly easy to recruit people inside the healthcare institutions. For instance, I remember once in working with rehab therapists, there was one specific person that was super keen of using the same technology for a different problem. Instead of using virtual reality for upper limb rehabilitation, she was more focused on balance. So we indeed had like an entire 2 or 3 sessions with her, and we were even exchanging articles and ideas on how can we facilitate the creation of the solution that she had on mind. And that was totally, outside our research scope, but still, she was the one pushing for the internal meetings with the other therapists, and she was the one facilitating us, being connected to other people inside the healthcare facility. So having that champion that is like very eager to bring this technology and to help researchers is probably the most key element.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, focusing on the benefits of the potential benefits of the technology rather than, the technology itself and, the details and the construction of the technology, I think is a really good point. There's a question here in the chat. I'll just read it. Have you experienced a surprising co-design moment where the user proved their assumptions wrong or made you pivot your idea?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. And I think that's one of the most interesting results that you can get out of a co-design. Like, and a lot of the times we bring initial ideas on something that we think will work. But when we test with users, we really, see, and it's very clear the participant didn't like, or our assumption was not necessarily met. So I think that's what adds a lot of value to the iterative testing, because you want to discover those things early in the design phase. You don't want to reach to the end of the project and having something that you believe is solid, and then having the majority of your users not being able to, play or work with your system. So I had many times surprising moments in which, we didn't think that something may work and it worked, or the other way around. We thought like, oh, this is very clear and they will be able to interact with it, and they were just not really able to do it. So the key aspect here is to be able to do a quick turnaround. That's where it's important. If something is not working properly, instead of, sticking with that idea, like really make the changes that you need to, change your prototype and bring something that is more usable for the participants. That's what is key. Sometimes that might take days, even 1 or 2 weeks. But if it's taking more than 2 weeks, you should be really concerned about the time that you are spending to turn around when it comes to creating these prototypes in a very iterative and agile way.
We have a hand up here in the chat. I'll just unmute your mic and then you can well, I've sent a request to unmute your mic, so you can say your question.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. And I just have a technical related questions related to the VR technology. So I had some experience with the VR, and then when I was playing game or like standing up playing it, sometimes I'm kind of facing kind of dizziness or tiredness after a short period of time. Have you found that similar, like something like that with your patients, or based on your personal experience? Like I just feel it's more tiresome compared to normal games based on my experience.
Yeah, no, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's already a percentage of the population that, independently of the type of content that you create in VR or the hardware that you're using, they will suffer from cyber sickness, which is not the correct term for what is happening. So, sorry. What I think is your solution, especially when it comes to virtual reality, you need to count for 10 or 15% of the population that would not be able to handle it. And that's more like a physiological aspect of, exactly when people get in a boat and they feel dizzy. And there's some other people that don't feel that. Or when they are reading a book in a car that is moving, and there's some people that can do it and some others that cannot. So there's very similar feeling with virtual reality. There are some design tricks that you can use to facilitate the order to prevent or to alleviate somehow motion sickness. For instance, in our game, we always had like a horizon, especially in this part of the part of the rowing. You will see like the rowing is the most disorienting activity. So in rowing, we always had like a horizon, so elements in the horizon. Like you will always be able to focus your view when you're feeling somehow cyber sick. You can also add like a virtual nose, or you can also prevent having sudden movements in the virtual environment. All those things are strategies to prevent cyber sickness and virtual reality. When it comes to older adults, I also, in this game, we don't allow them to use any of the buttons. So independently, if they press one or two buttons, nothing is going to happen. They only interact with their hands. That was also a strategy that was useful for the usability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. There's another question here in the chat. I'll just read it here. What are some of the challenges you have faced involving users or stakeholders in the co-design process, and how did you deal with these?
Well, one of the most, I would say, traumatic ones that I had was how to run all of these fun, engaging activities remotely. During the COVID, I was not able to access participants, end users, for instance, people living with dementia, with cognitive impairment, because they were locked down. So that took me a while, to kind of like find out the correct tools. But we finally managed to set up some meetings where we were bringing, videos and activities that they will be able to do remotely. So tools, in this case, was the solution for doing remote co-design activities. Another potential, or one of the other challenges that I had is always when I have people from multiple backgrounds, is something, how to facilitate the communication among them. For instance, how to facilitate the communication between an occupational therapist and a game developer. And they don't need to have a very, fluent and rich communication, but they sometimes need to talk. Sometimes they need to exchange ideas. So I always try to facilitate brainstorming sessions when they are all together in the same place. And I intentionally have, as I'm leading the sessions, I intentionally split teams in a way that they are always with a person from a different background. So they have some time to spend 40 minutes, 50 minutes having ideas or presenting their own ideas to others when creating this game. So yeah, that communication between people with different backgrounds is also a challenge, and I solve it by fostering activities in which they can all come together and think together to do it. And yeah, I think those are some of the challenges that I had.
Awesome. There's another question here in the chat. Do you consider the gamer-specific characteristics such as their weight, height, etc., in your models and simulations?
Yeah, a lot of the times we use both physiological and kinematic technologies to do tracking. So we don't necessarily use always things like weight or height, but we do try to account for instance, exercise intensity. So how these games are somehow designed that they follow the American College of Sport and Medicine guidelines what it's supposed to be a light or moderate or a vigorous physical activity. For the tracking technologies we allow, for instance, this game has a menu at the beginning where you can set up where the position of the player is in relation with the oars when they are rowing, so they can kind of like set those things up. So we somehow try to facilitate those settings, especially for the exercise professionals, because they ask for those. So, but yeah, more complex things that we have done is mostly working with heart rate and not allowing people to really go over their threshold. Yeah, beyond that, it's hard to consider a lot of those variables.
Another question here, John, in the chat. Since you're dealing with multiple professionals from several fields to design the project and the game, have you encountered any problems when it comes to intellectual property?
Yes. That's why we also tend to have that discussion in advance, especially when it comes to working with companies. You see here, for instance, in this specific project, we define right at the beginning that the commercialization of the research and development activities was the company. The company was the one in charge of that. And although we would be able to keep going with our prototype and do research activities with it, we as research team don't have the the right of commercializing it. Same thing for the long-term care home. They, for instance, had a discount on the hardware and software that we were creating, but they didn't have a level of intellectual property for commercial exploitation of those things. Sometimes we need to write down NDAs, or sometimes we either need to facilitate writing like patents or these potential patents. And we tend to involve people in an open discussion around those right at the beginning of the design process, so we don't leave it towards the end. But those things can be really messy if you don't do it properly. The University of Waterloo has an office that I would say sometimes it's helpful to give us some guidelines on what do we need to create before starting this process, especially when working with companies. But I will say, unfortunately, this is still very slow to give things or help us to set up the agreements in time, because as you have seen, this requires a very agile process. And if you engage the therapists and they are ready to collaborate, and then you need to wait for 6 months or 1 year for the university to do all the paperwork, sometimes you might get them disengaged in the process. And when you reach out to them, they are not ready, or this other people, and they are working in a different environment. So I think there's some challenges for or some opportunities for the university to kind of like help us as researchers to facilitate and improve the times. But I think that the Office of Research and Translational Research is being very helpful in trying to have an open conversation on what is needed.
Yeah, and I would encourage trainees to contact Watco. They will provide you with tips on how to consider IP issues, even before you start your collaboration. And we've been lucky enough to have some great speakers from Watco over the years with our Create. It's now 12:01, so we're 1 minute above our scheduled time. Before we end the webinar, are there any burning last minute questions that any attendee would like to ask? Okay, before we end, John, if I could, let's ask one more quick question. I think that there's a general perception out there that older adults are less inclined to adopt new technologies. With respect to your VR technologies and working with older adults, have you found that to be true, or have you found that there is a sort of an enthusiasm to adopt this technology?
Yeah, I think we have many different profiles in that back that we call older adults. There's definitely people that are very, and especially throughout the pandemic, they started or they really continue using a lot of the information and communication technologies to stay connected with their friends, or as a mechanism to cope with COVID. So that was something that indeed I did a survey. It was only, I think, like around 20 respondents, for this specific project that I was working as a consultant. But that allowed me to somehow bring these numbers here that you can see. These are, again, very much approximate on how some middle-class older adult will look like when it comes to, for instance, preferred digital devices. So I discovered that a lot of those older adults are already using phones. More than the ones that I was expecting are indeed using IoT devices like smart TVs or speakers, which was, again, surprising to me. But when you go and check the numbers in some publications, you will see that there's a trending adoption of those by older adults. Same thing with electronic tablets. And interestingly enough, at least with the population that I was researching, the element that they use the least is actually the computer or the laptop, which in my case, I was thinking that would be the one that they are using the most. So I will say there's definitely profiles of older adults that are really skeptic about using technology, and they don't necessarily want to get involved. And that's perfectly fine. You just need to be able to identify what is the segment when it comes to developing things or creating things for older adults. What is the specific niche of population that you are dealing with? And that's why modeling your users is a very important preliminary step before going to creating any type of technology. Discovering, for instance, what were the motivators that they have for playing games, independently which games they had, like things like Candy Crush or Scrabble or Solitaire. Discovering those was actually very helpful for me to bring features in the game that I was designing related to, for instance, open a chat voice while they're having a virtual reality headset, or involving more multiplayer features into that. And you see that here that most of the time they play games as a way to cope or as a way to develop specific skills, which was something that we were wanting to do in terms of cognitive training, and also escape the reality, which virtual reality does very well for them. So you will always find people that, especially older adults, that don't want to know more about technology, but you don't necessarily need to work with those. Or sometimes when they have that has a preconceived idea. When you bring the headset or they see others using it, sometimes you will be surprised that, they get or they feel encouraged to start using them, and it becomes a trendy thing.
Fantastic. Okay, with that, I think we'll close there. Thanks again, John, for sharing your expertise and perspectives on a wonderful presentation. The co-design, the importance of co-design is something that we really promote with this CREATE program. And I think that with this talk, you presented some great examples of the co-design process in action. So, thank you very much for presenting that. And thanks to all attendees for joining us this morning, and to all the attendees who asked questions. I hope you all enjoy a great lunch, and we'll see you again soon for our next webinar.
Thank you all, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.